So when you're getting started with blues soloing, like playing blues and pentatonic licks over a steady bass in E, you can reach a point where you feel like what you're playing is kind of boring, like it feels repetitious, or it feels like you just don't have a lot of ideas. And it can also sound kind of empty, especially if you're just playing single note licks over the steady bass. And you may be wondering, like, well, what about chords? Like, isn't there a way to use the chords that I know? Isn't there a way to incorporate chords into the solo? Can I even use chords as the basis for the solo? So in this lesson, I want to show you 4 chords, really 4 chord moves that can completely change the way that your soloing sounds. And the cool thing is, once you have these chords under your fingers, it will change your soloing right away. So let me show you. So we're going to work with just 4 chords, but not just the chords themselves, but how to play them so that they work when you're soloing. And this is going to do 3 really important things for your soloing. First, it's going to add a layer to what you're doing. You've got the bass, you've got the melody, which is a single note licks. This is going to add a 3rd layer, this chord layer, so you're going to have more texture and more nuance to what you're playing. It's going to sound more complete and more real or authentic, for lack of any better words. The second thing is it will immediately give your playing a kind of call and response, because you can move between the single notes and the chord phrases that we're going to do. And finally, it will immediately make the licks that you have sound better, because instead of just going from lick to lick, you can play a lick, you can have a chord response, you can go back to the next idea, have a chord response for that. Again, it's all about just giving your playing another layer of texture and nuance, all of which will just make what you're playing sound more like what you're listening to and wanting it to sound like. Okay, so let's look at these 4 chords. And I should preface this by saying each chord that I'm going to show you is part of a larger move where there's always a sort of additional chord involved to make the chord we're looking at sound good. So we're basically going to use different voicings of E. So starting with this E7 with the flat, 7, 3rd, and 5th on the 4th, 3rd, and 2nd string. I'm using my index, middle, and ring finger to play those strings. Then we're going to use this E7 on the top 3 strings. So here's the 5th and the flat 7 and the root. Again, I'm using index, middle, and ring. I've moved them up to the 3rd, 2nd, and 1st string. Next, this E7, where we've got the 3rd on the 4th string and the flat 7 on the 3rd string. And the root would be here on the high string, but I'm using index and middle to play these 2 strings, the 4th and the 3rd string. And then finally, this chord, E9, and I'm making a partial bar with my ring finger across the top 3 strings. So again, it's index, middle, and ring, and we're playing the flat 7, the 9th, and the 5th. So 4 chords, but each of those chords is going to have kind of an additional voicing that we're going to use with it. So if we're playing this E, first of all, we're going to play it by hammering on into the major 3rd. So you're going to grab the open strings and then do that hammer on. And before that, we're going to precede it with an A chord, which I'm using another partial bar here, middle finger across the top 4 strings at the 2nd fret. So here's the 5th and the root and the 3rd of A. So that's going from an A and then hammering on into the E chord. When we're using this voicing, we're going to come into it from a half step below. So here I'm at the 3rd fret and the 2nd fret and the open high string, which is forming a kind of E diminished chord. If that means something to you, great. If it doesn't, just think of this as the cool half step move that gets you where you're going. For this one, we're also going to half step in. So we're going to start off here at the 5th fret and the 6th fret, and then come up a half step which you could think of as going from an A with an E in the bass, right, like this kind of A chord. Or you could just think of it again as like a cool half-step move. And then finally, we're going to precede this ninth chord with an E6 chord, which is the root, third, and sixth of E up here at the ninth fret. And you can get to it by sliding up from the ninth chord. And so rhythmically, we're going to use these for now all the same way to make it easier to learn and remember them. So in that case, we're playing in, steady bass. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and. So it's syncopated. You're playing on beat 3, and then you're playing on the end of beat 4, which is anticipating the downbeat of the next measure. If you played it without syncopation, you just have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So that playing on the end of 4, it brings the chord an eighth note earlier, and so you get this feeling of sort of getting a jump on the next bar, and it makes it sound better, makes it swing more. So 1, 2, 2, 3, 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 2, and 3, and 4, and we can use that rhythm for the other three situations as well. Right, so 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 4. And same thing here. 1, 2. 1, and 2, and 3, and 4. And finally, 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and. So 4 chords, each one has kind of a secondary chord that helps you get to the main chord, and then we can use that same rhythm and practice each one of those moves with that same rhythm where you're landing on 2 and then the and of 4 to give it that syncopated feel. And now we can put these chords into context, and the way we're going to use them is as the answer to single note phrases. So if we have phrases like this, those licks have a certain kind of phrasing as well. They're leading you into the downbeat. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1. And so you can play all different kinds of licks with that phrasing, and I've talked about that elsewhere on the channel. I'll put a link to some of those lessons down below. But those kinds of phrases that lead into the downbeat, they set you up for those rhythmic responses that we've created that start in the middle of the measure with the chord. So any kind of lick that lands on the downbeat will leave you the breathing room to answer it with one of these chord moves. So the rhythm of the licks and the rhythm of the responses, they fit together, and that's what gives your playing a kind of inevitable logic. And so there can be all kinds of variety within that phrasing and all different kinds of single note licks, all different kinds of chord responses. But if you have just a few of those chord responses all rehearsed and ready to go, then you can land on them really reliably, and it can free you up to do more with the single note licks. and feel freer to play. That's the irony of having stuff that's worked out. If you've got a few cool chord responses worked out, it'll make your improvising sound better. And it'll sound better whether you have a lot of licks or even if you just have a few licks that you're using over and over again, because you can start to mix up the chord responses so that even a small bag of licks will start to sound better, more interesting, more creative, and you'll feel more confident playing them because you've got them. You can set them up in this kind of call and response that makes almost anything you play sound really good. The idea for this lesson actually comes from something that we've been working on this month inside my membership, the Fingerstyle 5. We've been working on a tune that's built on a 1-chord vamp in E, and so there were some questions about, well, how do you come up with an intro for a tune like that? Or how do you come up with an outro? And so we started looking at ways you could combine chords and single note licks and the steady bass to start building your own vamps and intros and outros. And so that got me thinking about how can we think of just a specific group of chords that are just your go-to voicings that will sound great no matter what when you're playing in E, and here they are. So if you're interested in working on building your repertoire, learning how to start improvising, or just tightening up your right-hand coordination and getting a better grip on where to find voicings and how to find your way around on the fingerboard, I recommend checking out my membership at the link below or the link on screen. If you've got a question about today's lesson, I would love to hear from you. Just leave it in the comments down below. As always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.